high-level overview of Photoshop. We're just going to kind of do a general run-through of these options that Photoshop provides you. I will try not to use keyboard shortcuts on this one as much as possible. The purpose of this is to really show you where to get most of this stuff through the interface. I do have those keyboard shortcut cheat sheets for you available on the Moodle for both Mac and PC. This file is found under your assets that I have up on the Moodle for your download. It's called landscape.jpg. So this is your Photoshop interface. I just simply open this file. Typically the first thing I check when I'm working with files that I open in Photoshop here is what color mode it is. This is an RGB color mode right now. We have other options to where we can change that color mode by going up to Image and then Mode. We have Grayscale. This index color piece, just kind of ignore that. We're going to go over Grayscale, RGB, and Cmyk. LAB color, that's something that we're not going to really need to deal with either. That's more for color scientists and stuff like that. It's kind of way too above what we're going to be dealing with as graphic designers. RGB, Cmyk, Grayscale. I'm going to actually brighten up my screen here so you can see. What I'm going to do is show you the difference between RGB and Cmyk first of all. And so I don't know if you could see very well, but I'm redoing and undoing. Now can you see like how the sky is very blue when we're looking at RGB rather than it's kind of getting a little gray on the grayer side with Cmyk. So the important distinction is to understand that when you're working with something in RGB, it's not going to print out like how it looks on the screen. That's because the color spectrum of color in print using ink and paper is less than the color spectrum that's enabled by pixels on a screen. So it's just a differentiation that eventually will come into play as you move forward. So just understanding the end result of this thing, being in print, I'm going to know that the first thing I need to do is go up to change the color mode to CMYK. But what I really want to do as well is edit this color so it looks as much like this RGB version as possible. And so I can do that from CMYK by essentially doing some editing in our colors and everything like that. So maybe I'll run through and just show you what I can do as far as dealing with the blue. So I can go to Image Adjustments and let's say I'm going to go into Selective Color. And then under the Selective Color menu, I can actually target the blues and I can just add more blue to them in the background very simply. So it gives me the option here in this drop down for cyans and blues. I'm going to go start with the cyan first, and then I have these sliders here: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Again, that's our CMYK. Cyan is our blue color. Magenta is more of like a pink. Yellow is obviously yellow, and black obviously black. So those are the 4-color process colors, and those are the print colors. So I can actually increase the cyan a little bit in that blue, so you can probably see a subtle change, well, not so subtle really on the screen, but now it's getting a little more blue, closer to what the RGB color, RGB version of that was. My magenta, I'm actually targeting the magenta pixels into that sky, and I'm adding more or taking away less. So I'm actually making the sky a little darker of blue, or making it a little bit brighter there. Yellow as well, believe it or not, they're well, there's not too many yellow pixels up there in the blue tones. I can drop down to this this blues target as well, and then see what I can do from there. Maybe I can increase the cyan just a little bit from those deeper blues. Maybe reduce the magenta just a tiny bit there. Yellow's not going to help me at all. Black's not going to help me at all. I don't have any black pixels up there, which makes sense. So that's essentially what I want to do to get to that, to get as close to that RGB color as possible when I'm working in CMYK. This is our history palette. If I click on this, and I'm going to drag this like panel out just so it doesn't collapse again, you can see that I can jump back and forth again, and kind of you can really see the difference between the RGB, the CMYK, and then our difference. So here's the RGB, the end result that we want, and here's what we got. So it's better. It's not perfect. We lost some of the cloud, but that's kind of a sacrifice that we wanted to make, so it doesn't look kind of more gray. We wanted it to have more of like a bluish tint to it. So essentially, I'm selecting the background by just choosing the color that I want to select in this selective color menu. For the green piece here, let's just kind of see the difference between what the RGB green looked like, and then we'll go back to the CMYK green. Not too much of a difference, and it's actually a lot more apparent on my screen than it is for you on the wall here. But essentially, what is happening in that in that green field of corn there is that it's getting less green. The reason being is that vividness of green is not there because when we went from RGB, we have a green channel. And so we have green pixels on our screen that are solid green. When you switch to CMYK, the way to create green is take yellow and cyan, i.e. like a light blue, and mix it together to create a green. So you're not getting as vivid of a green. So the big problem colors when you're going to print are the blues and the greens. The red's not so much. I mean, you can get a very bright red in RGB color mode that you can't get in CMYK, but it's not as noticeable as the greens and the blues for some reason. So again, I can go to Image Adjustments, Selective Color, and then instead of choosing the blues here, I'll go with the greens, and then I'll say, okay, I'm going to increase maybe the cyan and the green. It looks really blue now, but then I can increase like the yellow to bring back a little bit closer to the green. So I'm boosting up my cyan and green. This preview menu will show you the difference a lot better. So I can, with this preview box, most of the dialog boxes in Photoshop allow you to preview, to turn on and off. So that's kind of a quick reference to see what's changing here. And then hit OK to move forward. One thing that Photoshop allows you to do in their dialog boxes as well, it's a very handy trick. So say I'm going here and I'm doing a selective color change on my white pixels. Now you can see like I'm boosting the cyan in the white. It's not a pure white pixel because in these clouds you've got like these like mid-tones of kind of blue pixel or cyan, if you will, pixels in those clouds to make that depth perception and gradient in the clouds. So as I'm increasing and decreasing the cyan, it's changing. Magenta as well, it's increasing or decreasing the intensity of that whiteness of the cloud. If I make a bunch of changes and I don't like what I have, you don't necessarily have to go through all these menu items and switch everything to 0 or what have you. Here's my neutrals that I'm messing with the color and changing it up. I can actually hold down the Alt or Option key, and you can see here it says cancel and then reset. It's going back and forth and toggling because I'm holding the Option key down. And then if I can hit reset, then that's going to bring me back to where I started really quickly. So it's a nice shortcut to know and use sometimes. It just allows you to go really crazy with your photo editing and not have to wait for this thing to render before you say, I really need to start over again. So that's that piece of it. I also want to show, these are all the basic tools. So here's your move tool. Of course, you can kind of move your canvas around. I'm going to open up the layers. And I'm going to drag these out actually, just so they're constantly there. You can see that I have a move tool and I can move my artwork around, but usually in Photoshop, but it's always going to open up as a locked background, your JPEG, or your JPEG files once you open it up. This might not always be the case if you're working with a PSD file, because the person that worked with it before might have unlocked this. So the way to unlock it and move this around on the interface here is just to double click the empty area, and the dialog box to rename the layer will come up. It's best practice to rename, but sometimes it's just takes too much time and it's not worth it, and it's a temporary layer and you just want to get it unlocked and move on with life. So that's one thing there. Typically I'll do that if I'm wanting to really create an image composition out of something, cut it out, put it on a transparent background, etc. Just unlock that background like that. You can notice that it was locked the whole time as I was editing color. You can still edit color on a locked background layer via this file menus here. What you can't do is cut and paste pieces of a layer, etc. You can't move it like that either with my move tool. So that's the move tool. Let's see, we also have the crop tool. Let me just quick. Crop tool is pretty straightforward. Select it, you're going to see corner pieces that you can crop in on. It's going to kind of snap to the corner. You can crop it down this way as well. Just hit enter and it's going to crop into where you need it. Now I'm going to take my move tool again and move my image, and you can see everything that was outside of that crop box that I created is gone. So I guess don't use it too generously, I suppose. So I'm going to go back to that history tool and then just go right back to where I started, where my last move was, essentially in this file. Then we're going to move on to these selection tools. So we got the typical selection tools: rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee. These single row marquee tools might come in handy if you're doing like a web design or something and you need like a underline rule and you're not sure if whether or not you can do it in CSS or not. These are very basic. Click and drag, move. This comes into handy if you're working on something that's very geometrically based. Maybe it's a side of a building or something and you want a quick selection to change the color of the building from tan to blue or something like that. This could be something that you could use to quickly select the edge of the hard edge of something. Likewise, the ellipse tool, click and drag, something that's odd shaped, sort of an ellipse like that. You can encircle, click your move tool, cut it out. Otherwise, if you need something in a perfect circle, the elliptical marquee tool is going to do the same thing for you if you click, drag, and hold the shift key. So I'm going to stretch it out here and then show you kind of the difference. It's hard to see our marching ants, but what I'm going to do is click drag, not hold the shift key, and then show you what that looks like. It's more of an oval piece. Then I'm going to actually click drag, hold shift, and this is going to be your perfect circle. So that comes into handy down the line, and we'll go through some examples of that. Essentially, it's not use those selection tools to create those shapes necessarily. It's kind of like use those selection tools to zero in on a shape that is naturally round, and you just kind of want to refine the selection edge and cut the rest of it out. Likewise with the lasso tool, basically it's very much a very quick way to select things. I like the lasso tool a lot, actually. This is the one that I use a lot of when I'm working on photo editing, pieces of content that are on separate layers. So let's just say that let's just say I want to just get this green piece of the grass here on this side, but not on the other side. I'm just going to direct select, I'm going to lasso tool that half of the screen, and let me just image adjustment, selective color, and let's say I want to just suck out all the green. So half of this patch here is just dead grass, and the other half is alive and well. So that's a quick way to select stuff. Let's see. What else? Say I want to circle this cloud. Clouds are so fuzzy that it doesn't have a hard edge at all. So just want to quickly select that. Image adjustments. I'll do like a replace color here. Let's see if I can give this a really stark change. So that's the start of my poison cloud, if you will. Again, this lasso tool is going to be your friend when you have already really cut out something very precisely, and you just want to quick photo edit it or quick move it around. That's going to come in handy to quickly select it without having to retrace something so perfectly. So again, all of these options here have this little tiny arrow to the right side, lower right corner. If you hover over that option and you click and hold, you're going to get a menu of other sub options. So under the lasso tool option, you can have the polygon lasso tool. And this is great for hard edges because you can literally click and click again over and over again to create a perfectly straight line from point to point, or angled line from point to point, and then just make your edits that way. That one I would say I'll use quite a bit too. Just different situations, and I'm going to go through all of these tools and use them in different ways. Sometimes arbitrarily, it's just whatever makes the job go by faster. Polygon lasso, or magnetic lasso tool is our other option here. This one is more precise as far as if you want to go through really quick and trace something, like let's say this cloud. This might be a good option for you because essentially what it's going to do is it's going to follow the most contrasted pixels. So it's going to find the contrast in this situation between the very, very blue and the very, very white, and it's going to actually start dropping these little anchor points as I'm going along the way to kind of really trace this thing out more precisely without me having to do it very without me having to take too much time to do it. So this is kind of a quick but more precise method. So then maybe I could just take this out and move it here. It has a hard edge, so I probably would feather that edge or something like that. If I wanted to, like, let's just say move that, for instance. This this tool comes in handy if I'm working on a shoe and I want to cut something out of the sole or something like that. I can very quickly trace the sole of the shoe or any kind of element that has a lot of contrast with the rest of the shoe, and then just kind of really quickly trace it and just select it. Maybe I want to change the color or something. I can do that pretty quickly that way. All right. Another selection tool is the pen tool. The pen tool is one of my go-to selection tools. I can't so much, what I can do with the pen tool is really just create any kind of shape I want. It's going to be really difficult to trace something like a cloud, but maybe I can just kind of, it works just like Illustrator, really. Like if I wanted to select something that gets close in some areas and then other areas we want it to go wide, something like that. I'm very much clicking and dragging around this. I'm creating a path with my pen tool, and then going over to paths here in my menu, selecting that, dragging this out, and then using this drop-down menu here with my work path selected, and then using the option called Make Selection. So under this hamburger menu, I'll hit Make Selection, and then this is where a dialog box will come up to where I can establish how many pixels I want the edge to feather. So if I want a blended edge on this piece that I cut out, I'll pick more pixels. So in this case 5. If I want more of a harder edge, I'm going to go 0.5 feather on that because I want the pixels to be very sharp or that edge to be very sharp. It just all depends on what you're selecting, what you're working with. Let's say you're trying to cut out like a basketball or something. You might use the ellipses tool, but you might want to get in there and it has some kind of refined edge. You might want to get your pen tool out and then keep it feathered at 0 or 0.5. If you're cutting something out like a cloud, maybe you want to do more pixels, let's say 5 pixels. So now you can see I have my 5 pixel feathered edge, and it's really kind of furry on the edge there. You have an element of transparency there that I can just click and drag and reposition somewhere else, and then kind of make it almost look believable. I'll just transform it a little bit so it fits in that spot nicer. So that's the pen tool. That one is probably one that I use a lot of as well, especially if you're trying to trace detailed pieces of things, or you've accidentally selected something that you want to deselect. You can trace it with the pen tool, and instead of making a selection, you can subtract from a selection. So anything you can do to select with all these tools, you can use to deselect as well. So sometimes that comes in handy too. What else? Let's see, transforming. That's pretty simple. I'm just going to select this cloud here. I'm going to go up into my file menu here. I have my cloud selected, but what I'm going to do is go to Select and then go down to Inverse. I'm going to inverse the selection I have, so everything but the cloud now is selected. And I'm just going to hit Delete. I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D. Otherwise, under my selection menu, I can choose deselect as well, or reselect, in fact. Once that's isolated, let's say I have a couple of these, and then let's say in my layers menu, you can see I option clicked and dragged each layer a few times. When you hold the option key and click and drag, you're going to make a copy of that piece. Very much like Illustrator, basically. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to come up with all these different layers. Each layer has a transparent layer on it. So I have 7 transparent layers here, one on top of the other. So this is going to increase file size. So let's just say I want to collapse all these, right? I have my background layer at the top selected. I'm going to hold Shift and click the background layer in the bottom. With all of these layers selected, I'm going to go up into my hamburger menu up here, and I'm going to select Merge Layers. So now I have more of a reasonable file size, but the takeaway from this is that now everything is on one single layer, so I can't really isolate any one particular thing off unless I take, let's say, my Lasso Tool or any other selection tool, encircle something, and then just manually select it and move it. What I'm going to do is add a new layer. So what I did was I selected this this little icon here, and as you hover over it, it says create a new layer. Created layer 1. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to edit, select all, or I'm going to go to select and then all, and then I'm going to go to edit, and then I'm going to fill this new layer with black. So layer 1 is my full black flood, and then I'm going to move it behind my background copy layer of all my individual clouds. So let's say I wanted to select, let me see here, I'll get my lasso tool again. Let's say I want to select these these 2 clouds here. I'll just lasso them. Now when I take my move tool and I click and move them, whoop, I had the wrong layer selected. Make sure that that background layer is selected. If I take my tool or my move tool and I move it around, you can see that those little marching ants that I had originally right here, they're gonna run to the very edge of this layer, and then this as well. So this shape within this layer, and then this shape within this layer, because they have actual like active pixels rather than transparent. It's gonna zoom up to this little piece, and then just select the exact pixels that I need on this layer to move around. So that idea comes in handy, especially if you're like working on, let's say, like a smoke cloud or something. You have all of your smoke cloud pixels on one layer, and then it's on a transparent background layer. You change the color of the smoke cloud to like pink or purple or something like that, and then you deselect it. You don't have to reselect it. The best way to reselect it and change the color if you wanted to is very simply select the entire canvas, or even just encircle what you want selected with your lasso tool, and then just nudge it. Just nudge it left to right, and then the pixel or the your selection is going to focus in on the pixels exactly. All right, so transform. I got these 2 selected. I'm going to go up to, let's see, edit transform. Whoop. What I can do is just hit scale. So the bounding box is added around these 2 elements that I actually have selected here. On my background copy 7 layer, which is the layer that contains all my clouds. anchor points around the side. This one letting me squeeze them in. This one letting me kind of crush them from top to bottom. And then any of these corners here, I can just click and drag to kind of resize. The proportions are getting all messed up, but to maintain the proportions, I can just hold Shift and then drag towards one corner or the other. If I want to, let's say I want to rotate this thing, transform again with it still transforming selected. I can take my, I'm actually going up here, I went to transform and I went to rotate. And then now when I kind of hover over these corners here, my arrow is kind of creating this little rotating looking arrow. It's kind of like a corner half circle arrow. And then I can just rotate this however I need. This little anchor point piece in the middle is the center of gravity for my rotation, so I can, originally it's here, I can kind of move it like here, and then that could be my center point of gravity, or my center point, and so on and so forth. I can move it here, so maybe I want to rotate around this particular object. I can move it to the center and then just rotate around that way too. These same tools, or the same transform concept, is in Animate as well. So to apply a transformation, I would just click the Move tool, and then in my dialog box just hit Apply. Otherwise, I can just hit the Return or Enter key, and the transformation will be applied. Whatever I tweaked to it will be applied to that. Let's see. Gradient tool is one that we're going to use as well. Let me just deselect these two circles that I have here. I'm going to select deselect. I'm going to add a, take the lasso tool again, and I'll grab another cloud. Again, I'm going to get my move tool after I lasso tooled it, and I'm just going to nudge it left to right just to make my selection perfect around the edge. Then I'm going to use my gradient tool. Once I select this gradient tool, you'll see this menu is going to change a bit. I have these different styles of gradients, so I have radial, linear, angle, all these different ones. Should you feel the need, you need some of those. There's also some preloaded gradient pieces here that you can use. Otherwise, you can hit this little, I guess a cog wheel, and then hit New Gradient. You can rename it whatever you want. Hit OK. It's going to start out as black and white. I can double click that, and then I can start making any kind of adjustments that I want to my gradient here with these sliders. Double click the little thumb, or I guess the swatch here on the line, and just add a color in the pop-up. I can double click, add a color, hit OK. Hit OK, and then there's my new kind of gradient that I'm using. So with a gradient tool selected and an area on my canvas where I can add a gradient, I can then click and drag from one end to the other to where I want my gradient featured, and then it'll show up there. So you can click it, redo, undo as many times as you need. You can experiment with this radial piece, click and drag over, and so on and so forth. See, you can actually reverse it. So if I wanted the darker piece on the outside, or I'm sorry, the black tone on the inside and the red tone on the outside, or vice versa, I can do that too. For the most part, we're going to use the gradients for masks, like layer masks, and I'll go through that too, but essentially just for the purposes of today, I'm going to go over just showing you the basics of the gradient and how you kind of typically would use that. Let's see, what else? Copy paste, Command C, Command V, that's what I use all the time. Otherwise, if you want to go in and do it manually, it's edit copy, edit paste. Paste special. So let's do that real quick. Let's say I want to select this globe. I'm going to encircle it. I'm going to copy it. Copy. Make a new layer. So now I'm working with layer 2. Layer 2, I'm gonna go edit paste special, and that's gonna paste in place. So that's gonna directly paste, and I'll close all the clouds beneath it. That's gonna place the cloud image that I copied directly on top of where I copied it from. So paste in place. That's something that we're going to use a lot of in InDesign. But you can also do it in Photoshop, and you can also do it in Adobe Animate. The keyboard shortcut for paste in place is one of the ones that I felt very important to memorize. It's a kind of a strange one. It's Command Shift Option V. And that's also in the little cheat sheets that I have on the Moodle for you if you need like a reference or something. But that would be one that I would definitely memorize. Let's see, what else? Let's see. Okay, and then the burn and dodge tool, those are the last ones I'm going to go over today. I'm going to close this out, don't save. So burn and dodge, these are two tools. Let me pull up my sales guy here. So these are two tools that are beneficial to use if you're working on photography, especially for photography of people. What I'm going to show first is I'm going to do the dodge tool. The dodge tool basically goes over an area, and it really subdues the darker tones within an area. So here's kind of what pops up with the dodge tool. And I can target a range of color tones. So I can get the shadows, I can get the midtones or the highlights. I want to do the shadows, and I want to lighten up sort of this area around his eyes. Maybe he has really dark circles around the eyes or something like that. Then I'm going to adjust the exposure of those of my dodge tool. So exposure really means essentially the intensity of the dodge tool or the strength of it. I typically, when I'm doing the burn and dodge tools, I bring it down quite a bit. I never use the 100% exposure. I kind of use like the 30-ish, sometimes even 15%, because I want to do a very gradual changes to it. As I'm doing this here, I'm kind of going over and over the same spot, and actually my screen is showing that I'm taking away some of the shadow. I'm going to make it more intense so you can see it a little better. Now it's actually working, especially from above the eye. Here's some of this dark stuff. But now when I go to my history, and I can turn it on or off, you can see like what's been happening. So like here's the original, and then here's the after I get done. So this kind of clears up some of the dark circles around eyes and so on and so forth. Let's see, even maybe some of this stuff on the side of his nose, if you were to want to do something like that, you know, that's just how you would do it. So it really, the dodge tool is going to subdue the dark, and it's going to bring out the brighter tones in that. Now that's for shadows. If you wanted to brighten up some of the highlights, let's see if I can get his teeth to get whiter. I mean, they're pretty stinking white, but yeah, like I can, here's kind of the difference. And this is at 65%, so I would probably typically, to make it more believable, I go to like about a 30%. I decrease the size of my brush here. You can do that with your left and right brackets on your keyboard. So right bracket increase, left bracket decrease. For all your brushes, all your any kind of brush type thing like this. So I'll make it smaller and just, you know, the better way to do this would be to select it. So what I'm going to do is use this, my magic wand tool. This I didn't show you earlier either, so I better do that. The magic wand tool is just going to select pixels that are very similar to each other depending on the tolerance level. The tolerance of 60 is very high, and you can see I've selected even more than just his teeth, which is not necessarily what I want to do. So I'm going to bring it down to like 30% of tolerance and click. This is more realistic to what I want. It's selecting just the teeth, not really the gums and everything else. So now with that selected, when I take my dodge tool and go over this area, I'll have more control over what's getting brighter and what's not. If I wanted his teeth that bright. Okay, last one is the burn tool. So the burn tool is exactly the opposite of the dodge tool. So let me just quick go back here. So I have my exposure at 100%. I'm going to, let's say I'm going to darken the shadows. If I want to go back and make his eyes look darker, rather than getting rid of that dark circles, I can just adjust my exposure again. The more intense, lower, less, or I'm sorry, the lower in intensity is a higher percentage, and the lower intensity is the lower percentage. And then I can just select an area, keep going over it, and you can see he's starting to have some of the reds coming out of his eyes and all that. So I can increase the intensity of it, and then again just kind of give him sort of like a black eye. Oh, it's almost like a red eye, more so. Needs more mid-tones. There we go. So I got so I selected the mid-tones, and now it's going to make it look a little bit more believable. So that is what we got there. Are there any questions on that? You guys understanding sort of the concept of those tools so far? There's plenty more tools to go through. There's blur, smudge. Smudge is something I want to demo too. But I don't know what I would smudge in this image at all. I mean, I guess I could just smudge his face. But I won't go put you through that today.